Today we're going to talk about 007 First Light, and in this video, we'll be going through all of the major updates the game has received over the past few months, one by one, especially the new details that came in March, the technical developments, the information that started to emerge on the story side, the character updates, and how the game has started to take shape overall will be the main focus of this video. In short, we're going to talk about where the game has reached in recent months. If you're excited for 007 First Light 2, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. First of all, let's begin with the most basic update. 007 First Light is now officially set to release on the 27th of May, 2026. As you know, the game's original target was the 27th of March 2026, but with the announcement that came at the end of December, the game was delayed by 2 months. IO Interactive said it made this decision to give the game extra polish, improve the quality, and deliver a stronger experience on launch day. In fact, the game was already playable from start to finish at that point, so the delay seems to have been made more for final quality touches than because of a development crisis. After that delay, everyone naturally turned their attention to the first months of 2026, and IO Interactive really did keep its word. Starting in January, the flow of news around the game picked up speed again. On one side, technical details started being shared. On another side, new characters and cast announcements arrived, and on top of that, the story side became much more visible. So we can easily say that the last few months have been a full-on marketing push period for 007 First Light. One of the most attention-grabbing official pieces of news in early January was the announcement that Dimitri Vegas had joined the game's cast. IO Interactive revealed that the famous DJ would be playing a character we would encounter throughout a global mission chain in the game. This detail alone may not completely change the tone of the game, but the important thing is this. Before release, IOI is positioning 007 First Light not just as a Bond game, but as a major brand launch that is connected with pop culture and aimed at a broad audience. Also in January, the first serious technical information about the PC version arrived. On January 6, IO Interactive announced the PC system requirements and its NVIDIA partnership. According to the official statement, the game will require 80 gigabytes of storage space, and on the minimum side, it will target graphics cards at the level of a GTX 1660 or RX 5700, while on the recommended side it will aim for something like an RTX 3060 Ti or RX 6700 XT. And that tells us this: 007 First Light is going to be a technically ambitious game, but it does not look like a title that demands completely extreme hardware and only aims at ultra-high-end systems. Another important point in the January period was that the core identity of the game started being described much more clearly. In its official messaging, IOI repeatedly emphasized that this is a third-person action-adventure game, that it is bringing its own stealth experience into the Bond universe, and that at the center of it is a 26-year-old young Bond. So this is not the story of Bond at his most polished and perfect. It is going to be the story of a Bond who is rougher, more reckless, and still being shaped into control. I think that is one of the strongest points where the game sets itself apart. When we moved into February, the story side became much clearer. The official story trailer announcement released on February 12 showed that the game is playing seriously not only with action scenes, but also with its narrative side. IO Interactive describes this story as a standalone, reimagined James Bond origin story. In other words, we're talking about a new beginning story that is not directly tied one-to-one to the film universes, but is trying to carry the spirit of Bond while standing on its own. Within this new story framework, Bond's starting point is also much clearer now. According to the official descriptions, here we are seeing a 26-year-old Bond who comes from a Royal Navy background, a talented character, but one who pushes the rules from time to time. As he is brought into MI6, he steps into the world of espionage, and as players we will directly accompany that transformation. So the game is not just going to send us on missions, it is also going to show us how Bond becomes Bond. One of the details that stood out in February was the game's locations and Bond atmosphere. The official site says the game will spread across different missions around the world and take place in breathtaking locations. Especially the detail about the Grand Carpathian Hotel in Slovakia and the International Chess Tournament shows that the game will not be made up only of combat and chases, but will also preserve that classic Bond intrigue. Forests, lakes, classic architecture, and luxurious environments all coming together create a really strong potential on the atmosphere side of the game. Another important piece of news that came on February 18 was especially valuable for us. IO Interactive announced that 007 First Light will offer Turkish text and subtitle support at launch. This is a very good development, especially for players in Turkey who are following the game, because in a Bond game like this, one that is so focused on story and dialogue, localization makes a real difference. So this news may look small technically, but from the standpoint of player experience it is a very important plus. When we got to March, the marketing campaign really started to accelerate. On March 3rd, IO Interactive released the second episode of its developer diary series called Beyond the Light, and this episode focused directly on the characters and cast. That was an important move, because the game is no longer being marketed only as a young Bond game. It is now being presented as a full package together with the characters around him, mentor figures, the supporting cast, and the enemy side. The most attention-grabbing part of those cast reveals was how much more clearly they defined the game's character identity. Patrick Gibson is playing Bond, Priyanka Burford is in the role of M, Alistair Mackenzie is playing Q, Kiera Lester is playing Moneypenny, and Lenny James is in the role of John Greenway. So IOI is preserving the classic Bond figures, while also adding its own interpretation. Especially seeing more experienced and weighty characters beside a younger Bond could make the mentor-student dynamic much more interesting. During the same period, new characters were also added to the Bond universe. Through press coverage and official announcements, it was revealed that Lenny Kravitz would appear in the game as the character Bomba, and that Gemma Chan would provide both the voice and likeness for the character Selena Tan. This also shows that the game will not be a Bond project that leans only on nostalgia, but one that wants to build its own original character pool. I think that is very important, because if you want to launch a new game series, you cannot just rely on M, Q, and Moneypenny. You also need to create new memorable faces. Another very important topic discussed in March was how different the gameplay would be from Hitman. IO Interactive and members of the press who saw the game kept emphasizing the same point. This game has elements that resemble Hitman, but Bond's pace moves much more aggressively forward. In other words, instead of a structure like Agent 47's, where you patiently wait for minutes and move completely invisibly, the goal here is a more energetic flow where Bond can walk through the door, talk, bluff, throw punches, open fire, and escape when needed. That is why the game's core gameplay pillars now make much more sense as well. The spycraft, instinct, gadgets, and combat systems each represent 4 different faces of Bond. Quiet information gathering, instant instinctive advantages, Q-branch gadgets, and direct confrontation all come together in one structure. I think what IOI wants to do here is very clear. Instead of giving the player one correct solution, it wants to make a few different approaches possible inside the same mission, so that the player can truly feel like Bond. The details that came out regarding Moneypenny were also interesting. In the news from recent months, it was said that Moneypenny would take on a more active role in this game, with a position more directly tied to the mission flow, almost like a field analyst. That means we may be seeing a much more visible Moneypenny, not just as a classic desk support figure, but as Bond's voice in the ear and an operational support line. If handled the right way, that could seriously increase the weight of the character in the game. Without question, the biggest technical update that came in mid-March was the NVIDIA partnership. On March 11, IO Interactive officially announced that 007 First Light would launch on PC, with support for path tracing, DLSS 4.5, dynamic multi-frame generation, and DLSS ray reconstruction. That shows that the game is being positioned not only as ambitious in gameplay and story, but also as a showcase project in visual technology, especially in lighting, reflections, and shadow quality. The game is clearly aiming for a major leap. We should take a closer look at why this technical update matters so much. The Bond universe is naturally full of luxury locations, glass surfaces, nightclubs, hotels, laboratories, sports cars, and stylized interiors. Advanced lighting technologies like path tracing really show their strength in exactly these kinds of games. So this is not just a matter of the graphics will look a little better. The overall atmosphere, cinematic feel, and that Bond elegance can all be directly fueled by this. GameRant's GDC 2026 preview also gave some good examples of that. In particular, the glass door refrigerator in the bar scene, the visibility of the drink bottles, the way the light breaks across surfaces, and how the smaller environmental details looked much more natural with RTX enabled all stood out. IOI also explained that these path tracing efforts are not only meant for users with high-end graphics cards, but also indirectly improve the overall quality of raster lighting. So even people playing without RTX may benefit from this to some degree. When we bring together all of the news from the last few months, one thing becomes very clear. 007. First Light is no longer just the Bond game from the Hitman studio. What we have now is a game with a locked release date, announced technical features, a clearly defined character cast, confirmed Turkish subtitle support, a release story trailer, and an extra visual technology push revealed in March. In other words, the project has moved past the stage of being an abstract source of excitement and has become something tangible. My personal opinion is this. IO Interactive has chosen a very risky path here, but also a very correct one. Because the easiest option would have been to make a safe game that simply repeats classic Bond cliches, but instead, they chose a younger, rougher Bond who is still in the learning process, and they are designing the gameplay around that with something more dynamic, more flexible, and more action-heavy. If they can get that balance right, First Light could become not just a good Bond game, but a strong first step for a whole new Bond game series. At this point, the real question no longer seems to be, will the game be good, but rather, how big of an explosion can IO Interactive turn this potential into? And to be honest, after the updates that came in February and March, my confidence in this game has clearly gone up. Because now we are no longer looking at just a cinematic trailer, but at a vision that is becoming more and more clearly defined. The story side is settling into place, the character side is filling out, the technical side is getting stronger, and even the marketing language is becoming more confident. Now the only thing left is to see how all of these promises actually feel in your hands on May 27. But looking at the news flow so far, 007 First Light is already getting very close to becoming one of the most talked about action-adventure games of 2026. So yeah, guys, we went through all of the major updates that came in over the last few months about 007 First Light, and now the thing I'm most curious about is what you think. Do you think IO Interactive can really make a strong Bond game? Do you think the younger Bond idea will work? Did the March updates increase your confidence in the game? And which detail are you most excited about? Make sure to write your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more gaming news, analysis, and updates like this. See you in the next video.